faces, which you've already heard from. I have Jim Sweeney, Scott Dockham, Anu Bowman, Dr. Manny Oliver, and Chris McNeil. I'm going to introduce them each as they come up. I know that Jim has to catch a flight, so is he? Okay, yeah. So I'm going to have Jim go first, and we are going to have about 15-minute session and then 5 minutes Q&A right after. So since he might not have very much time, if you want to have your questions, you might want to ask them just as he's running out the door. So Jim Sweeney is the manager of the Air Force SBIR STTR Commercialization Readiness Program.
And good afternoon. Looks like you survived lunch, and I really appreciate the opportunity. Once again, I'm Jim Sweeney. I'm from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I'm the Air Force Commercialization Program Manager. And I do have a slide deck, but apparently it didn't go through the email, so I'm just going to do some word pictures for you. First thing about the Air Force program is, you know, we're both an investor and a customer. So when you consider working with the Air Force, what we're looking for is it's twofold. We're looking for your success. We're also looking to generate activities that are related from the technologies you bring. Our main focus is on the warfighter. We're looking to generate return on investment. There's a whole lot of moving parts to the Air Force SBIR program. And for the commercialization side specifically, what I do is my main focus is on transition. It's not the phase ones, it's not the phase twos, although you should be considering transition. Our effort is looking to find out how it actually gets out off the shelf, out of the laboratory, and into somebody that can actually use it. Yesterday we talked about how your data rights for the Air Force, those data rights are protected for 5 years after the last contract award. And you know, if you've delivered your product, your technology, you're good and covered for 5 years. And one thing that was not stated yesterday was that if you have a new contract with that same technology, the clock gets reset for another 5 years. And you can do that as long as the Air Force or Lockheed or Boeing or whoever else is buying that particular product, as long as it's still relevant. On average, we do about 600 topics a year, and it results in like about 2,000 phase ones award. So there's a whole lot of effort going with the Air Force program. And what we've got is the federal government typically invests like about $2 billion annually with the intent of trying to bring the small businesses along. You know, the adage is when the tide comes in, all boats have to float. And with the SBIR program, that's what we're trying to do. So we're looking to make sure that you guys have an opportunity to grow and prosper. I mentioned yesterday that the Air Force SBIR program, in fact, all of the SBIR program it's relationship based. We're looking for the partners. We're looking for you to be a wingman for us, and we're looking for those technologies. Now, I'm kind of racing through this a little bit because I do know that most of you are familiar with the SBIR program, so I'm not going to bore you to tears with the phase one, phase two, or any of the others. However, when you're looking at your schedule, you're also going to see phase three. Remember, that's where you're not using SBIR money. But I also want you to put in the back of your cranium that when you're talking phase three, that's where you're making your money. That's where you want to be. That's the gold ring for the entire SBIR program. So if you've got a way to transition and you've got a way to make some money, that's when you're going to start paying the bills, growing your company, and you're going to get all that derived satisfaction that you've worked so hard to achieve. So when you're working through this whole thing and you're talking to the Air Force or any of the SBIR folks, try to figure out how you're going to work your SBIR program or your phase three effort. What we found is historically there's a large amount of confusion about what phase three is. The congressional language basically says you have a phase one, you've satisfied the competition requirement. Phase two, same, which means for a phase three, you don't have to recompete that. You've already satisfied the requirement for competition. We've had contracting officers in industry. We've had contracting officers in the Air Force. And we've had program managers, industry and Air Force. We've had small businesses and large businesses that haven't understood what Phase 3 is. We put together a book. We've even got an electronic copy. We've got just a couple left here at the event. But we have it online. And what I suggest is, if you went out to our website, it's STTR.af as in Air Force.mil. If you went out there, it would direct you to where you can download a copy of the Phase 3 booklet. It's intuitive. It won't necessarily put you to sleep, but it has a whole lot of information, regulations, the FAR clauses. It's got a whole lot of what Congress intended. So I highly recommend when you're talking SBIR with the Air Force or any of the other SBIR agencies, by all means, try to figure out, make it a point to understand what it's going to take to transition, commercialize, sell your product. This is where you're making your money. And, you know, you just hate to see the companies struggling. When you're doing your Phase 3, a good chance you're over the hump and you're actually working as a business. So, we've got a brand new program for the Air Force. We've just recently changed how we do business. We're actually going to have events like this. And those companies that do work or receive an award for Phase 1s, we're actually going to show up with a government credit card, and we're going to pay them on the spot. We'll bring them up, we'll recognize them, and what the Air Force is planning to do with the blessing of the Secretary of the Air Force and so forth is we'll have a one-page contract, which is radical. We're going to run a government credit card, which is radical, which means they leave that event with a signed contract. They leave that event with money in their bank. They're up and running. And the question we ask as they're leaving the building is, are you done yet? You know, I mean, we get to say that. But the point is, you're not waiting months and months and months forever and you go bankrupt and go out of business. You get the money on the spot. And the Air Force is in the process right now of doing that. I spoke to you a little bit about partners. NASA, for instance, they have loaned us an employee from NASA Glenn up in Cleveland to sit in our office, which means we now have reach back for NASA topics. We will be funding NASA topics with Air Force money. In about 3 weeks, I'll be sending approximately about $40 million over to the U.S. Navy. That's a big deal. We're partners with the Navy. A lot of what they do is synergistic with what we're doing. Try to get involved with that. Try to be one of those contractors that, or small businesses that they're looking for. Now, I think I'm getting close to the end of my time, so I'm going to leave some room for some questions. We got a whole lot going on. The program's getting a heck of a lot more exciting, and I think that the SBIR program is one of the best investment programs that the U.S. government has. Be a part of that. Want to see you guys succeed. I'm from a small business family, so I get the trials and the tribulations. Let's see if we can keep you from struggling and skinning your knees or whatever. Love to have you do business with the Air Force. The Air Force is extremely small business centric. It's a passion of mine personally, and my entire office is solely focused on small business. Give us a call, work with us. We'd love to see what we can do to help you out. So with that, I'm going to ask the question. Any questions?
Did you say that the one-page contract and paid upfront credit card, was that for all 3 phases or just Phase 1s?
That's going to be for the Phase 1 awards right now. General Holt down at in San Antonio, he's agreed to, as contracting senior leader, he's actually going to generate the paperwork, and we'll have that on site, and all we're going to need is your autograph, and then we'll say, see the attendant at the door there, and we'll run a credit card, and it'll go to your bank. So we'll have it documented. The back page will be all the standard boilerplate, clauses that are important. But the biggest thing is, I've received my SBIR Phase 1 award. Here's the documentation, and here's my dollar amount that I got. It's going to be a really cool thing. You know, we talk about giving you money, but we're actually going to give you some money. And we're looking forward to doing that. Yes, sir.
Jim, what's the mechanism for that? Is that through prize challenges, bake-offs? What's the format for that?
We've just recently come up with the legal department at Wright-Patterson. They've come up with, this is how we're going to use the government credit card, the GPC. And General Holt, he's all on board. Dr. Roper, SAF-AQ, he's all on board. We've got all the top cover we need. I've never heard of this before, so it's brand new to us. But what a cool idea. It's been vetted. The legal guys are happy. All the senior leadership are happy. And they say that's the way they want to go. We've got a really large event coming up. We're calling it Dr. Roper Days. Actually, that's not the real name. But he's having an event 26 March. We think it's going to be in Boston, Massachusetts. Those companies that have received notification that they've got a Phase 1 award, they will be invited to the event, at which time we'll have a contracting officer on spot. I'm not one of those, so I can't obligate the government for anything, but they can, and they will. They'll slide the card. They'll sign the contract. You will sign the contract. You'll have it witnessed, all that kind of stuff. And you're going to walk away with, oh, my God. Oh, here's the other thing. You paid money to travel there, covered. There's a 3.5% fee that GSA is going to charge, or the bank is going to charge, to use the credit card. That's covered. And so you're actually going to walk away with a little bit more than the standard 150. You're going to have travel covered. You'll have your credit card fee covered. It's really cool. We've never done it. I think this is going to work out awesome.
I think we have time for one more question for Jim.
Oh, no, I was.
You're it, sir.
Who gets to keep the frequent flyer or the hotel points from these credit cards?
That's going to be Bob, and that's Bob spelled backwards.
He can neither confirm nor deny.
There you go.
The existence of any hotel reward points on Marriott or Starwood Preferred Group. Where do we get a good overall listing of the topics, the groups, the people? Is it through just the standard SBIR solicitation? Because we can do a lot more things than what we're doing, and we want to expand into some areas where I just don't have the people to do it right now, but this is obviously how I get the money for them.
Okay, what we do is if you go out to STTR.com, that will get you the listing of what keeps the Air Force up at night, what we're looking for. And the list is long. It's broad enough to where there's a lot of lateral flexibility for solutions that you can bring in. We'd like to have you talk about that. And then when we have our 3 solicitations every year, for instance, 19.1.2.3, when the BAA, broad area announcement, goes out, that's when we'll say, this is kind of what we're looking for, and then you respond accordingly. But I would say go to afsibirsitter.com, and that's where we list ours. Also, you got the DoD site that they have a whole bunch of others. That's what I would recommend.
Thank you, Jim. So Jim brought up about Phase 3 successes, and earlier in one of our panels, Zach Berklin mentioned that NASA SBIR, a company that's successful for us, has been REI Systems. So in the agenda, if you look at the first page, I think they're one of the big sponsors. But Tom Fazio over there, raise your hand. He is from REI Systems. So if you're looking into how they went from Phase 1 all the way to Phase 3 and want lessons learned, he's the guy to talk to. Okay, so thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
We'll say goodbye to you. Have safe travels. We're going to move on to Manny, and I stole his seat. So Dr. Manny Oliver, and you guys are familiar with him. You've seen him yesterday and this morning, but he is the director of the SBIR Programs Office and at the Department of Energy.
Yep, thank you, and I think I will go to my slides, although I think, if they're phasing down. Go. Is that, oops. Okay, there we go. Sorry, moving along. So, as I mentioned yesterday, for the Department of Energy, this whole infusion thing doesn't work for us since we're a granting agency, and we're generally not the customer. That's not to say that parts of DOE, particularly our national labs, don't often acquire the technologies that are grantees, but if we were doing a program in that fashion, we would do like NASA or Defense and issue contracts for those. So we're a granting agency, so what I'm going to talk about today is not necessarily infusion. I was going to kind of take some lessons learned from some of our companies who are commercializing. And in discussing that, we have two really categories I would put them in. A lot of our work is in energy or clean energy. Those people are, pursuing technologies and going after fairly large markets. Those are commodity markets, very competitive, requires a lot of investment to get into those markets. And I'm not going to talk about them today because I think it's probably not as applicable to this community. When I look through the NASA topics, I see a lot of topics that look more like our Office of Science topics, where you're developing some advanced instrumentation. And from what I heard yesterday, it's also very similar that NASA might buy 5 of them in some of best case scenarios. So they're not there, even though they may be the customer, they may not be a very big customer. And oftentimes, if you really want to be successful with commercialization, you have to look for other markets. And so that's what I'm going to focus when I'm talking today. We do, through our Office of Science and through our Office of Nuclear Nonproliferation, we often fund very specific technology advances we need. But again, we're generally not a customer, and when we are, we're fairly small. So it's what are these companies doing when we ask them to solve these technology problems, and how do we achieve success with commercialization? So I'm just going to talk through I brought 6 examples of companies. The first one is Adelphi Technology, and they were actually chartered working at some of our, the technology need was actually to have a compact neutron source. And again, we have big neutron sources, whole reactors at DOE when we want to generate neutrons. But there's sometimes a need for a small source when we're, for example, doing work on beam lines and trying to get things aligned. So they were developing technology for that. And again, their innovation, they came up with what was needed, was a very small, compact neutron source to provide a local neutron beam. It was a lot of advanced R&D to do that. They actually received 3 R&D 100 awards in the course of doing that. But in order to achieve sales, and again, the sales of this, as you expect, are not substantial. They've sold about 8 million to date. We're in actually a very variety of markets. And only 3 systems actually, I think, went to the government. They sold about 30 systems to the private sector. But they did have to do a lot of homework, and this was kind of some painful process for them. Again, a lot of them were physicists trained to look at scientific instrumentation, and they had to go out and go to trade shows, try to figure out who would need a neutron generator. And they were able to achieve significant sales. And some of the markets weren't obvious. For example, the mining industry. As a lot of the ore is coming off the belts, and they want to know what the content of the ore is and how it's changing over time. They use something called neutron activation analysis, and so we're able to do that. Neutrons are also used in cancer therapy, so they've worked with the medical industry to develop some instruments. There's a picture of one of the instruments over there on the right. And again, so in this case, they did go through, have to find a lot of what we call adjacent markets in order to be successful. Next company talk about was one that was the topic they responded to was from our Office of Nuclear Nonproliferation. What that office does is, in addition to sort of preventing and detecting transport of materials, they also look at nuclear explosions and try to do remote detection of those kind of events. And so what they need is actually fairly sensitive seismic sensors to do that. And so the company Silicon Audio responded to that. I did want to point out that they, their innovation was most sensors of this type are electromagnetic. You basically move a mass through a coil or a magnet through a coil to sense the displacement. They did develop an optical seismic sensor, and actually had very broad dynamic range and frequency response. One of the things that allows you to do is you're very close to a big seismic event. It takes a different kind of sensor than when you're maybe 100 miles away and trying to detect the same thing. So having that broad dynamic range was really important. And the person who founded the company was a graduate student at Georgia Tech, developed the technology there, licensed it from Georgia Tech when he left. And again, the need for this in terms of, as you can imagine, there are not too many people detecting nuclear explosions. It's not a big market. And so they went out, and again, a lot of work was done at trade shows trying to find people who would need an advanced sensor of this type. And the initial market they found was in oil and gas surveys. A certain class of those surveys could use a detector like this. It was very robust. And they worked for a year to get the instrument to meet the specs of that. And then the bottom fell out of the oil market a few years ago, as you remember, and that market completely disappeared. And again, this is the kind of pivoting that's often going on in this space. And then they pivoted again just to look at what turned out to be a very broad range of scientific applications, one of which is shown there. It's actually for a NASA project. And they found that the key enabler here was actually to get on a U.S. Geological Survey vendor list, and that really opened them up. And I think we're making about 500 units a year. Recently, they've decided to increase their manufacturing eightfold just for the broad range of research work that's going on that could take advantage of their sensor. And for each of the slides, later on, if you want to see more detailed success stories, those are links to our website to look at a more detailed write-up, as well as the company websites. Next one I'm going to talk about is Euclid Tech Labs. The Department of Energy builds all the accelerators used for nuclear physics or high energy physics in the United States. And they were developing RF accelerator components to do something called electron bunching. So when we build these beams that are smashing particles, they're not actually just a continuous beam. They usually bunch them in tight, short bursts. And so they had developed that technology as part of for the RF accelerators. But again, a very limited market for those accelerators, both in the US and foreign markets. And through really serendipity, they were talking to people in the electron microscopy community and people who run transmission electron microscopes to do materials analysis. Thought this would be a really great idea, because one of the things they can't do is very fine time-resolved microscopy. So if you're trying to analyze something, say what's going on in the interface of a material, and see the reaction go on real time, they really need pulse beams with, the beam operating at gigahertz level of the pulses coming through. And this electron buncher was capable of doing that. They did have to adapt it for that market. They're currently working, I think, both with NIST and Brookhaven National Lab and Joel, which is one of the major electron microscope companies, to bring that to market. Again, a very different market from where they had started, but I think finding these things will enable, and that is potentially a fairly large market for them to go after. This company was actually mentioned during the last session. This was Captain Murnane Labs. This is a company that was spun out by 2 CU faculty. We needed, for the high energy physics research that we do, some ultra-fast pulsed lasers. And again, they were able to achieve 10 femtosecond pulsed lasers, which were the fastest in the world. Actually, just this recently, October, they received the Colorado Governor's Award here for high impact research. And as was mentioned, their initial markets were really research markets. There weren't that many people who needed pulsed lasers like that. It turns out, because if you can have a pulse laser like this, you can actually use an upconversion process to make extreme ultraviolet and soft X-ray sources, and that has become their commercial product. And they're also being able to use these lasers also for some coherent diffractive imaging. And there's an image of that on the right where you're looking at a semiconductor device. And this was proved so enabling that Intel Capital stepped in and made even though she mentioned they were bootstrapped, she didn't finish the story. So this company has grown quite well. In fact, has moved into a new manufacturing facility through an investment from Intel Capital. And again, I think their market is actually, the growth in their market is going pretty well. Another solution here was, this is another nuclear forensics one. Again, one of the ways they detect people having nuclear weapons or exploding them underground is to look for signatures above ground in the atmosphere. And here they're looking mainly at mid-infrared type standoff spectroscopy, if you will. And they developed the first tunable IR laser using quantum well structures. This was a researchy topic at the time, but they they brought that, they were successful in making that commercial. Again, you see they've already achieved over 90 million in sales being able to do that. Of course, nuclear forensics is not a major market for that, and they've been able to do that both in a lot of detection markets and just a wide variety of markets, things you wouldn't expect. So one of the things they are using it for is in the operating room where you might have gases for anesthesia escaping from the patient, and they want to make sure that those levels don't get too high and start not impacting the people working in the operating room. So again, some of the applications can be very different from where you start out. And the last topic I'll talk about is radiation monitoring devices. And again, working with our Office of Nuclear Physics, which had a need for advanced detectors that could detect gamma rays and neutrons. And they actually developed a new material. This is going all the way back to scratch to develop this new scintillator crystal, which they grow from scratch. They've also developed that into a detector. And this is another case where the Infusion maybe is not at DOE, but we provided some initial SBIR and STTR funding. They went to the Department of Homeland Security and also to Department of Defense to get some follow-on funding because they are very interested in monitoring these materials both from sort of a radiological weapons kind of perspective and transport of materials. So they've gone on to get funding at these other agencies and again, bigger markets. In fact, the instruments, the detectors they're selling are actually going right into instrument suppliers today. And that has been, again, they've just started sales recently, so they're only about $1 million a year, but they do expect that to expand. So just to wrap up, I think I just want to provide an example where, again, DOE, we do fund fairly early stage, sort of hard technical problems. And I just want to point out that for many of our companies in those particular research topics, the adjacent markets are often much bigger. And again, to identify those really requires you to step out of the box a little. A lot of the times this may require you to go to trade shows and places that scientists typically don't go to try to find those other applications, oftentimes requiring still fairly deep technical discussions. And I did want to echo a point that I think was made in the last session, is not to, is to think carefully about the SBIR and STTR awards you go after. I think the point was made that, it can be like heroin and you get addicted to just going after SBIR awards, but, I would encourage companies to think strategically about picking up those SBIR awards. You want to build some competency in some area, and it may take a few awards to, get you up to a fairly high level of competency, but you do want to concentrate them in an area that you can, again, go after commercially. So I think I will stop there and see if I had any questions.
I was energy program manager for SAIC years past, and I did some also SBIR for my own company under DOE that were really quite nice. One of them in polymer purification catalyst for terephthalic acid, which BP was very much interested in at the time, and we had a pretty good thing going on. DOE at that time had actually a lady from Denver, Kristen Johnson, as Undersecretary of Energy, and she went and put together $58 or $54 million in something called an accelerator program with the idea of contracts based on technical merit for phase 3 value of death commercializations and things. And I was wondering how much you knew about that. It ended up in debacle, but there were competing interests from the administration at the time with internal DOE elements and deal teams that just wanted to do science and business development, and the administration wanted to do something else. And if you value your career, you'll let it drop at that. But the question I had was, is DOE still, or has anyone restarted any efforts in that area? Because it was absolutely brilliant program. It was a great design, and they just couldn't, they had a lot of money, but they just had to give it away as quickly as they could, and it never really reached its economic potential.
So yeah, I am familiar with that. That happened in 2010. It was about a year before I got there. And that was some Recovery Act. What's giving me a part of that was Recovery Act money. So it was kind of a one-shot deal to, pour money into phase threes. But we have not gotten back to doing that because, and again, I think it depended on the source of the funds primarily. I would say that under this administration, the emphasis has really been pushing back on later stage research and focusing it more on early stage research. So I don't think we're really heading in that direction anytime soon. What I did point out yesterday is that we are putting a significant amount of money in second phase twos. Again, about 20% of our phase twos get a second phase two, which would be somewhat similar to phase three at another agency. And again, because we're not, the customer, we do some phase threes every year, but they're very limited in number. So we're doing, maybe 20, 25 sequential second phase twos, and starting later this year, as I mentioned, we will do third phase twos as authorized by Congress. So that's coming. But that's really probably the major extent of our funding post the first phase two will be through these additional phase twos.
I guess I had a question about, have there been any situations where, say, for example, you have a phase one SBIR from NASA or any other federal agency, and then there was an application within the Department of Energy, and you took that and funded either a phase one or phase two from DOE?
So, there is something that I think was mentioned earlier. So in statute, you can get a phase one at any agency, and in theory, get a phase two at any other agency. But the agencies have to be essentially set up to do that. So in our phase two solicitations, we do allow people who have phase ones at another agency to come to us and submit a phase two application. And it describes what you need to do there. So first, it has to fall in our mission space, and we have to have had a topic in that area. And it's really set up so that if something happened at that agency, you got the phase one. So for example, they had a change in direction, so you can submit a phase two there, that you could look to us to do that. Now, the program wasn't set up so you got a phase one at one agency, and then you can go to the other 10 agencies and submit a phase two the next year and fan out. And that's not really the purpose of it, but I think if you have a reason for it. So our phase two solicitations do allow phase ones from other agencies to apply. I won't say that's true for every other agency, but we are set up that way. Any other questions? All right, I will run off to some one-on-one meetings.
Thank you, Manny. I'm going to hop on your heroin comment there. I think I speak for all of us at NASA SBIR when I say that we too are addicted to SBIR itself. We want to make sure that small businesses like you guys are successful. So when you see us running around, we're always trying to make your lives easier, whether that's through our systems, talking to you about how we can improve our processes. So if you see us around, be sure to flag us down. And if we're talking at 100 miles an hour, you know why. Okay, so next up is Anu Bowman, who is the Program Manager for DARPA's Transition and Commercialization Support Program.
Good afternoon. You heard Susan yesterday speak about the DARPA program generally. And my tagline comment with, as I work with Susan, is it's her job to attend these events and reach out and bring people into the DARPA SBIR STTR program. It's my job to get people out of the program. So let me, I'll take a minute. I'm not going to brief these slides in a lot of detail, but I'll just walk you through what does that mean for us. So we don't have a CCR program. We have a TCSP program, which is Transition Commercialization Support Program. And our goal is just to maximize the potential of technology. So DARPA's technology and the topics and programs and projects tend to be fairly early stage. So in talking about, what does phase 3 look like for a DARPA project, it usually means more S&T. It's usually not acquisition. On very, very rare occasions, is a DARPA project ready for acquisition? So we're working with the companies in whatever form they're in and trying to help them figure out how to get to that next bit of funding that's going to help keep the technology moving forward, develop legs so it actually can reach some potential. So this is, I'm going to come back to this because this is where I'll spend most of my time. You can have access to all of these charts. There's a whole list of services that we provide, and to include conference and outreach events like this. And there's a listing of folks on my staff. But this is how we think about the program. So just like everybody else that has an SBIR program, we get companies within the program of all different sorts. Some that are very mature, have done a lot of SBIR, STTR projects. They know what they're doing. They've been around the block. They don't need a whole lot of business mentoring, but they might actually have a couple specific asks, things that they're looking for. They want a point of contact in the Air Force that has this particular capability area that they can talk to. So we can help them with that. We also get the professors that have just decided that they've got a neat project and they want to try and commercialize it. So they're still working out of their garage part-time, working out of their university lab the other part-time, and there are 2 employees. And business plan, they're not even sure they can spell business plan. So we get everything in between. So when we interact with our companies, the DARPA, and it's across the topics and the projects cover the entire 6 technology offices in DARPA. So everything from space systems to biosystems. We spend time up front with the companies just trying to really understand what is their business model? What are they trying to get from this technology? Where do they want to see it go? And that conversation is really, really key to how we interact with them and what they want to get. So our program is not cookie cutter. We provide a range of services, but not all companies need those same services. So at all times, we're working to customize our interaction to what the company wants and needs. If they don't need a lot of attention or don't want a lot of attention, they just need a specific thing, okay, great. If they want to talk to some of the folks on our staff that are much more commercially oriented, and we have a couple folks that are, about eventual VC funding, we can go there, and that's what we focus on. We spend a lot of time not doing business development for them, but teaching them how to do business development. And what that really means is that we've, canvassed the entire space of, federal, so, DOD as well as non-DOD, federal government space, big primes, the more commercial-oriented primes, VCs, other funding organizations, everybody that might possibly care about DARPA technology. And we've developed points of contacts that we can share the portfolio with and just see where we can help the companies get some traction. So we spend a lot of time doing that kind of matchmaking, always at the company's discretion to say whether or not they want to take the match, whether they want to interact with them or not. And that's our model, because that's what works for the DARPA projects. Just a couple examples. I don't have the success stories that Manny had. Those are nice slides. I might have them the next time I do this. But just without naming specific names about companies, I'll give you a couple examples. We do interact with the big primes, and we share the portfolios on a very regular basis. And right now I've got 190 projects in my portfolio. Slightly fewer companies, some have multiple projects. So one of the big primes, who shall remain nameless, we set up telecons where our companies will brief out what their capability is, and sometimes we do NDAs in advance of those telecons if both parties agree. Other times we don't, but we keep the conversation at a level where an NDA isn't required. So just to touch base so that the companies can decide if they want to go through the paperwork. This one had an NDA. It was a fairly detailed discussion. The big prime had a number of SMEs, technical SMEs, on the phone so that they could see the charts, hear the company, ask questions. And this is exactly what we want to have happen. It doesn't happen as often as I'd like, but we're about 30 minutes into the conversation. All of a sudden, one of the big prime SMEs says, I love this. I'll give you 20K right now. Let's get a sidebar going, and we'll go ahead and cut some internal paperwork, and we'll get you 20K for you guys to work with us on some IR&D. So that's right there, phase 3. It was only 20K, but it's the beginning of a relationship with that big prime. It wasn't necessarily tied directly to an acquisition program, but it is the beginning of moving that technology forward. Another example, more acquisition-oriented. Again, another company that we actually had present we do a DARPA GWIZ SBIR session at the Defense Manufacturing Conference, where we showcase some technologies that look very promising. So one of the companies that actually presented at that conference, it's about a year later, the large prime, again, this is though for an acquisition program, recognized that they needed some additional technology expertise as part of their supply chain. And this particular project that they had seen briefed and that they became aware of had just the right magic, this was going to help them solve some of their problems. Problem being, though, that this small company was only 5 people and not in a position to, in a robust way, stand up for their supply chain needs if they were going to bring them in. So they approached us to help, and as it turns out, this was an Air Force project, Air Force acquisition-oriented project. And through some discussions with Air Force CRP, with the big company, with the little company, with the small business, in the process of putting in, now the paper's just about to be cut. So they're going to get a CRP that's specific and some additional funding from the prime, targeting the development to take the next phase of development to bring their project into this acquisition program. But the large company has taken on the mandate to work with them as a mentor to help develop their capability for manufacturing. So another really, really great success story. We like to hear those. One more I'll close with. This one was on the commercial side. So a company that started with technology kind of in the trust area. So a big issue is trust in manufacturing and trust in the supply chain. So that was their particular technology. Called and said, hey, really think we need to go ahead and do some investment. Looking for an investment partner, looking for some VC. They were, as it turns out, going to be in the right area to attend a couple events that the folks on our commercialization side of the house were well cued into, and to be able to make introductions, get them some exposure to certain VCs in New York and in the Northeast, as it turns out, not Silicon Valley. And so that worked out really well. We, the conversations continued. We were able to kind of do a couple more interactions, and they got a seed round, a good few million they raised from their seed round. So obviously this is them doing all the heavy lift, but it's us opening some doors. So you can see that our interactions with the companies and with their technology is very specific to where are they and what do they need. So that's what we do at DARPA. And yeah, you've got the slides. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to interact with you.
Thank you, Anu. So next we have Scott Dockham, who is the program coordinator for USDA's SBIR program. Let me help you here.
Okay, how's the cheesecake doing for you all? There's a couple down here, so if anybody's hungry, come on down. No, this is great to be here. Just a real quick question. How many of you have actually stopped by our booth or had a one-on-one meeting with our folks from USDA while you've been here? Okay, so we've got, okay, only 2. Okay, good. So my talk is just going to be a little bit different. USDA, a lot of folks kind of think we might be a little out of place at this meeting, but in reality, we've actually have seen a lot of activity and interest in the program. So I'm going to kind of go through a few slides that describe how the program operates, and then I'm going to describe some of our current companies we're funding and some success stories, and then we'll move on from there and we'll do some questions if anybody has them. So real quick, as I mentioned yesterday, that our program is a grant program, and the reason why we do that is because we want to see ideas that are initiated by you all. So you've identified a problem in the ag space, you come to us and you say, hey, we want to solve a solution, we have a solution to that problem, and we want to see if we can find a product, or we have a product we want to develop and move it into a market. So we look at that, we base our awards on the scientific and technical merit, the company qualifications, and the commercial potential for that innovation to move into a commercial market. We also allow a lot of subcontracting. I'd say about 50% of our companies that come through our program actually are subcontracting with universities as well as our USDA labs. So that's really encouraged. Our annual budget is about 22 million. That kind of fluctuates from year to year. And then our grants, our phase 1 is for $100,000 and phase 2 is for 2 years for $600,000. And so just to give you a kind of flavor of the competition that we have, in FY17, for phase 1, we had 533 applications submitted that were reviewed, and we funded around 15% of those, so 78. And then for phase 2, because we're pulling from our phase 1 pool, we had 67 submissions and funded about 35, so it's about 50%. So, you know, yesterday I mentioned we're seeing a lot of interest from the aerospace and defense industry in our program, and the reason for that is because there's a lot of overlap in what we see in the ag space to what industry, the aerospace industry and defense industry is working in. So these are some clear examples, you know, information technology, robotics, electronics. I mean, I won't go through this entire list, but you get a good sense that we have opportunity within the ag space for these technologies that you're developing in defense and aerospace. If you just switch them up a little bit, you can actually find some very good market opportunity in the ag space. And so that's why we're so glad to be here. People we've talked to at our booth and at our table have kind of, you know, we've kind of turned some of them to kind of look at us, and they always say, most of them said, we didn't even consider USDA. So we're pretty excited about that. We have some topic areas. We have 10 of them, and I'm not going to go through these all in great detail. I'd recommend you go and check our solicitation, because you'll find a lot of the things that we're funding on that previous slide will fall into a lot of these categories. But we do have two that I think are very important to understand. It's the two at the bottom. A lot of times we have defense companies or aerospace companies or, you know, NIH companies as an example. They come to us and say, you know, we have an off-the-shelf technology that we've already developed. You can go and buy it. It's not a big deal. And they're like, but SBIR is truly a program about new innovation. And we say, not necessarily. Here at USDA, we have two topic areas, which is our small and mid-sized farms and our rural and community development topic area, which is about helping those communities. So it's a societal type of thing. So we're helping small and mid-sized farmers maintain profits, increase efficiency, or we're seeing rural and, you know, trying to help rural communities thrive and survive, because we know a lot of those rural communities are kind of going away. So if your technology, even though it's off the shelf, everybody knows about it, but you're applying it to help out one of these groups, we'll fund it in our program. So that's a nice little thing about our program that a lot of people don't know about. Okay, so now talk a little bit about some of our projects that we're funding. So we have a brand new 2018 phase 1 project. This is spectral sciences. And what we're seeing in the program is a lot of drone technologies coming through, particularly where they're attaching a lot of sensors to the system and trying to go, you know, they fly them over the crops, and they're able to provide data back to the producer or the grower to tell them how they're going to actually deal with the crop. You know, they need to water more over here, fertilize more over there. They got an infestation over in this area. And so this data that they're getting off these drones is helping them with that. But one of the problems that we're starting to see is that the shadows from the clouds can actually start changing your data and not actually giving you the real thing that you need to know. So this company's coming in, and they're looking at how cloud shadows inhibit or can impact aerial imagery using using drone systems. So it's really cool. We're really excited to see how this plays out, and they've already gotten a lot of interest from a lot of the drone manufacturers and those folks that are making sensors. Another cool technology that we funded as a phase 2, Phytosynthetics, is a company that works in the lighting industry. So they've come up with a way to take LED lights and actually use them as a way to grow crops. You've all probably seen people growing crops indoors, greenhouses and stuff like that. But one of the problems is it's very energy, it takes a lot of energy to do that. So what they figured out is if they can actually monitor the plant and determine when the plant is happy or sad, for lack of a better word, they can increase the lighting, decrease the lighting. So it's a biofeedback system, and the light can adjust accordingly to how the plant is enjoying the environment it's in. The other aspect to this is they're also looking at adaptive lights. So they use LED lights that can actually determine how much sunlight is actually penetrating into the greenhouse versus how much isn't, and start kind of fluctuating with that. So taking the biofeedback system and the adaptive light system, they've come up with a very efficient way of ensuring that the crops that are produced indoors are very strong and healthy. Another cool technology, so Ecovative is a company we funded several years ago. These guys came together and they said, you know, if we took agricultural waste and fungi mycelium, which is basically kind of a glue, what they can do is create this foam type material. And the foam type material is actually being used as packaging material for a lot of industry partners right now. So IKEA is one example. They're taking a look at this and using it as packing material for their furniture. Dell has looked at this and is using it for the packaging of their large computer servers that they'll ship out. So it's a very low-tech type of technology, but one that is had a lot of impact. And we're starting to see some of this actually being looked at in the aerospace industry as well as defense industry. So it's kind of a reverse method going from us over to those other agencies or those other type of programs. So this is Alteros Energies. This was a couple of gentlemen who were at MIT, and they recognized that there was a problem with getting rural energy or electricity to rural communities or rural outposts. This is something you would typically think maybe the military would fund because they got their small their small units what might need some electrical. They don't want to use diesel generators, but basically what this is, it's a very large helium-filled balloon or donut, and in the middle of that is a wind turbine. And what they can do is they actually tether it to a trailer, and they take it out to where they want to generate the electricity, and they can raise it up several thousand feet up in the air, higher than a typical tower can go or a windmill can go. And there's also a constant wind speed. And now that you're able to generate electricity, constant electricity. If a storm comes through, the cool thing is they retract it back down to the ground, storm goes by, they put it back up in the air, and you're back to generating electricity for these rural outposts or these rural communities. So what's really cool about this technology is evolving. They've gotten a lot of investment. $7 million was invested into the technology, and what they're now doing is using a version of this by attaching cellular antennas, and they're now able to provide cell service to rural communities that couldn't have it before. So that's another really cool success story for us. So I usually try to just follow up with a little bit of a timeline on how our program works as far as solicitations if you're interested. Our phase 1 solicitation typically will come out in July of each year, and the proposals are typically due in October, and then we'll typically award in June through August of that year. So we just finished a solicitation last October, but if you're interested in the program, it's a perfect time to start thinking about it. And you can always contact our national program leaders or myself to start talking a little bit more and engaging with us on technologies you're developing. And then our phase 2 dates are there as well. So that is about it for me. Is there any questions anybody has? Okay, so maybe the cheesecake's kicking in, huh? All right, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I wish I had one of those donuts in my backyard. Yeah. So lastly, we have Chris McNeil, who is with the SBA, kind of overarching all of these SBIR programs.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So I am Chris McNeil with the SBA. So as Anna said, we are the coordinating agency for the program. That means we do not make awards, we do not have money. But we oversee the program, we develop policy, we try to build those connections. So I want to talk kind of broadly across the program. So as you've heard the last couple days, there are 11 different agencies that are part of the SBIR STTR program. They span the entire breadth of the federal government. Within that, you've heard a little bit, there are contracting agencies and there are granting agencies. There's some big differences through those. So one of the things I always tell companies, think broadly. And I'm glad everyone that's in this room, we've had a lot of really good conversations, as Scott said, there are areas where you wouldn't necessarily think there's an overlap. Once you start looking into topics, there are those availabilities, whether that is in a phase 1, a phase 2, or ultimately that phase 3. So in SBIR STTR, in a phase 1, phase 2, these are my options. Got these 11 agencies. Within that, NIH got a series of institutes and centers. DoD have got about 13 components. Once I look at phase 3 opportunities, that expands to the entire government. But what's one thing I should know about that? So you've heard the last couple days that the government's a big place. Not everyone necessarily knows the rules. And a lot of elements of SBIR go against everything that you've been told as a contracting officer. This idea that I can do a direct follow-on award, that this competition requirement has been met. Because once you competed for that phase 1 or a phase 2, if it's been a direct to phase 2, you have met those requirements. That means in phase 3, I can go anywhere across the government with what I developed as long as it extends, completes, or derives from that original work. So a couple other elements you should be aware of as you think about commercialization. So you should be aware of your rights. That is one of the biggest things that you can do. You need to advocate for yourselves. We are looking for technologies and solutions as the government, but that doesn't mean we know absolutely everything that's out there. And we're typically looking for ways to make our job a little bit easier. These are mission critical capabilities. These are research and development priorities that the federal government has established. These are areas that we know we need additional ideas. We need solutions or solutions that may not be tackled through other sources. So if I'm looking at phase 3, so you know the couple basic requirements for SBIR, those go away in phase 3. So no limits on the number of awards that can be made in phase 3. The dollar amount is no longer restricted. The number of employees you have is no longer restricted. Let's see. So then switching a little bit forward, so I started to talk about, so a couple of terms you should know. So derives from. So this is looking for work that is originating from the work you performed in that SBIR STTR, that phase 1, that phase 2 work. Maybe you're looking at, well, I developed this, but if I took it in a different direction, I didn't examine this in my phase 1, I didn't examine it in phase 2, but I'm looking at it, the government's looking at it, there's some additional capabilities. That is work that is extending from that award. Or maybe NASA is a great case of this, same with the DoD. I was a need that was identified by the government, I had my phase 1, I had my phase 2, maybe I picked up a couple other programs in between, and now this product is ready. It's now something that is completing the work that I did in that phase 1 and phase 2. So that is sometimes is a little bit more work on the S&T side, so it needs a little bit more technical readiness development, or maybe that is ready for an acquisition program. As people have also said, SBIR funding in phase 3 cannot come, or phase 3s cannot come from SBIR funding. So we can get you to that higher level, but you need to be developing that final plan. And while a phase 1 to a phase 3, it's requiring a lot of very different skills, but some parts are the same. So when I'm looking at a phase 1, I need to understand what that need is. So the government has identified topic areas, they've given me varying levels of detail about what specifically they're looking for, and a contracting side, it's going to give me a lot of requirements. It's going to tell me very specifically what they're looking for. Granting agency, it's going to tell me a very specific problem, but it's going to be open to some different concepts to how I get to that point. As I'm looking for phase 3, I also need to know what that need is. So you heard a lot the last 2 days about knowing your customer, identifying your customer. That is crucial. This is not an applied research, a basic research program, it's an applied research program. And in some cases, NASA may be your direct customer. That may mean you need to have that relationship with a Northrop Grumman, with a Lockheed, whoever is going to be the integrator on that piece, whoever is actually going to be buying that piece. So start building those relationships. You don't want to be at the end of your phase 2 and then realize, I don't really know this customer. Whether that's I don't have a personal relationship with them, or I don't know what specifically they're looking for. We don't want you to develop something that is a fantastic development. It is something that works great, but it's not where we're looking for the need that was established. So, phase 3 contracting. So there are a variety of ways phase 3 dollars can come through. Sometimes that is additional research dollars, we're saying. Sometimes that is a word from the government. Sometimes that means going out to the commercial sector. You can have both. There's no limit on the amount. We're not saying you can only pick one type and you have to stay within that. But for your phase 3 rights to work, you had to have a phase 1 or phase 2 that is deriving from extending or completing that original work. In a NASA DoD context, that's typically saying coming from a contract. Now, sometimes that's also a sub. So again, I came a little bit from the Navy, and one of the things we always would told companies is, when was the last time you saw a small business awarded a carrier contract? Entire thing. It's not going to happen. But you're going to have a piece of that. So again, understanding how you fit in, what about what you do is unique? What are your advantages? What do you supply? And then where are those needs going to be right now, and where are they going to be in the future? So again, also the idea that you have direct award authority. So you all hear it sometimes referred to as sole source, direct follow-on. So you've met that competition requirement. You have the ability to say, I've developed work that meets what you're looking for, or is this something you're looking for? But start looking for those opportunities and then know your rights. Because again, contracting officers are not going to be aware of those in a lot of cases. So NASA has a phase 3 guide. Air Force also has another, as Jim Sweeney was talking about earlier. And the Navy also has a good guide. So now you may be thinking, I'm not looking at working with the Air Force, I'm not looking at working with the Navy. There's a lot of elements through that. So it's designed both from a small business perspective, but also from a program manager or a contract officer perspective. But it'll show you sections of the SBIR policy directive that list out your rights. It'll tell you what you need to know about data rights, IP protection, different options that you have as you're looking through additional forms of capital, whether that is equity financing, debt financing, whether that is awards at a local level, at a state level, at a federal government level. So you have a lot of different options. Another thing to note is sometimes we get, or as you've actually heard a lot the last couple of days, we get more good proposals than we have the ability to fund. So sometimes you submit that proposal, whether it's a phase 1 or phase 2, and you're not awarded. Doesn't necessarily mean that you followed the wrong track, that the work you developed wasn't great. That also doesn't mean that that ends. As you heard Jim talk about, Air Force does reachbacks, the Navy also does a lot of that. So agencies will go and look at what's been awarded from other agencies. We're constantly looking for solutions. DARPA knows they're not going to be the customer. They also know they don't always get all the same ideas to their proposals, or there's shifting priorities. There's new areas that now become areas of need for that agency. So continue to look. Also, sometimes it takes multiple awards to get to that final phase. Continue to work on what you were developing, continuing to build it out. You can, so it'd be nice, and I'm the type of person that when I start something, I think, okay, there's this straight path. I apply, get my phase 1, get my phase 2, depending on the agency, maybe I get that sequential award, maybe I get a commercial readiness pilot or program, but it doesn't always work that way. It's more of a jungle gym than it is a ladder. So sometimes it'll take multiple years, or sometimes you developed work that is truly state-of-the-art, but it's too state-of-the-art. The industry's not quite ready, or someone's not quite seeing that what you're proposing, you said it's feasible, but they're not quite buying it. So through SBIR.gov, so we've had questions last couple of days, where can I look to see what you're interested in? And each agency maintains their own website. They maintain databases that show what they funded. They have information about their point of contacts. But if I'm telling you to think broadly, because a lot of times it's easy to know, okay, I know what NASA's funding now, I feel comfortable about that. Maybe I work with Air Force, but maybe I don't know that there's a couple topics at Naval Air Systems that would be very comparable. Or maybe it's the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health. So through SBIR.gov, we have topic listings. So I can search back through every topic, every single agency, every program, from the beginning of time up to the most recent, and I can look and see, when did it open, what did they say they were looking for, and who those point of contacts were. Use that information, make those connections with the technical point of contacts, with the program managers. Start to see with them if they have a fit, if there's still a need there. You can also look at award searches. So I can see every single company, again, from the beginning of time, every single program, what's been funded, who it went to, and use that information. See if there's been a pattern. Reach out to those companies. Again, if you're looking how to navigate the program, or if it really makes sense to work with this agency or work with this center, in NASA's case, reach out to some of those companies. All their contact information is listed. Get their opinions. See where they're at. And that can be from a standpoint of getting a better sense of your competition, So also seeing if there's opportunity to partner. Can you fill a gap? Can you team? Because we also see a fair number of cases where, maybe my company has part of the picture, but not quite enough to win that award. Or I've done something really great, but if I partner with company B, we can get the rest of the way through to commercialize. So another key point, don't do this alone. Don't feel like you have to do it alone. So through SBIR.gov, we also have a listing of local resources. And within the program, we realized we ask you to do a lot. We're saying we have this research priority. We know this is early stage. We know this is high risk. But we want you to develop that. Phase 1, we want you to prove it's feasible. Phase 2, we want you to prototype it for us. It's a lot of work. At the same time, we're also saying you're going to commercialize this as well. This entire process, we want you thinking about, once you making connections with those customers. You may have been a startup when you first started, but at the end, we want to see more of that company. So it's great and it's important that you're developing the technology, you're building out the TRL of that, but you also need to be building your business. You need to be maturing it. And as you've heard the last couple days, occasionally there are holes. In what your company has, what you feel comfortable in, it gets into new territories. Maybe that is a disagreement with your founders on what the proper direction is. If you want to stay within your technology area, or maybe see about broadening that out. Do you want to be the manufacturer? Or do you want to be a company that stays with research and then licenses out? Do I even have the right people on my team if I wanted to just be a company that licenses out the work I'm developing in an SBIR? So through our website, there is a local resources tab, the bottom left corner of the page. So that will connect you in with a series of partners throughout the country. So that can be small business development centers who can help you, and you have some in Colorado that really also know the technical side. That's not always the case. I would encourage anyone who's here local, contact Sharon King from the Colorado SBDC. They're one of our FAST awardees. As she was mentioning earlier today during the lunch hour, part of their job under that award is to be a statewide coordinator, not just their area, but to help companies identify opportunities in SBIR, work on their proposals, figure out what comes next, figure out how they can be responsive. Also, we'll connect you with PTACs, the Procurement Technical Assistance Centers. So these are entities that are funded to be aware and help companies with contracting opportunities, both at the federal level and at the state level. Other resources you can go to is through SBA.gov, so the main SBA webpage. There's some similar connections. So again, there are FAST, there are SBA district offices, SBDCs, PTACs, women business centers. So again, if you leave today and I made a connection with someone that is a resource partner, but I don't exactly remember who they were, or down the road it hits you, well, maybe it would be really nice to talk to Sharon. I have a need for that now. A lot of those contacts are going to be found between SBIR.gov and SBA.gov. But you're not in this alone. You need to make sure you have the resources to help you get to that final commercialization phase. So on that note, I don't know how many people were able to attend our session yesterday, but there's also a change recently in the SBIR statute called Technical and Business Assistance. So starting in the end of 2011, Congress passed some legislation that created essentially a cutout from SBIR awards that is $5,000 to be used in a phase 1 or a phase 2 per year for technical assistance. So the idea was, how do we help firms make better technical decisions? How do we connect them in with series or networks of scientists, engineers, kind of help them commercialize this product? Back in August, as mentioned earlier, there were some changes through the National Defense Authorization Act. One of them was to change that section. So it went from what was called discretionary technical assistance, which you may be familiar with if you've had previous awards, to technical and business assistance, which we've been calling TABA. So a couple changes from it. So some agencies elected to create contracts through that authority. So they could connect you with a vendor. A lot of times those focus on developing commercialization plans, but there's a variety of tools that they'd had at their disposal. You as the company could also go and elect to find those services on your own. So in your proposal, you would let them know, this is your intent, this is where I'm intending to go, I have the ability to secure those services. But moving forward, as we said, it was designed to help you make better commercialization decisions, but there were a lot of gray areas in that, areas that companies really needed to actually commercialize their work. And it was also the limited dollar amount. So as of August, those changed. So in a phase 1, it went from $5,000 a year to $6,500 per year. Big change being in phase 2, So from $5,000 per year to $50,000 per project, opening up to a couple new areas. So product sales, IP protections, market research, market validation, regulatory plans, manufacturing plans. So as Scott and I were talking about yesterday with Bethany from NASA Ames, we're trying to get more information on it. It was a requirement that was kind of sprung on the programs. We're still adapting to that, but any feedback that anyone has on what is helpful, what you're looking for, how different decisions would affect how you propose to it. This idea, we don't want this to be something that becomes a burden or becomes something that causes you more concern. It's designed to be a benefit. It's designed to make sure you give companies have access to those new services. And it also needs to be done through a vendor. At the moment, it cannot be done in-house. But again, try to use that. If you're looking at your end state, what you're going to do to commercialize, and you really want to stay within that R&D realm. I just want to do R&D services. I don't have the expertise. I don't have the people to go out and market my work or to really find what's out there. I really just want to license this. Bring someone on through this program that can help you with that, that understands the rules, can get you the right types of agreements. Or if I know, it makes sense for me to manufacture this right away, and then I'll decide what's happening. Get that additional assistance on developing a manufacturing plan. Make sure you're giving yourselves the resources you need to be successful. Again, we're asking you to do a lot, but it's possible. And it may require a lot of work, and again, you're going to have to grind through this process. There are times where the stars will align. We have that work, it was developed through, and we've already identified the customer's been involved, they're ready to go. And maybe that works once, but then what comes next? What is my plan going to be? And SBIR cannot be my only plan. And maybe as a startup, that is that lifeblood. That is what gets me off the ground. That's what gives me a start. But as I start to mature as a company, it starts to get into those business decisions. Does it make sense for me to continue to go back to the SBIR well? Am I now pursuing topics or work that doesn't necessarily align with my primary areas of interest? Am I going too far out? Am I growing at a different rate than what I want to be at? So start looking at that. Give yourself the best opportunity to be successful down the road. So this is my contact information. Also, I was talking about the main page for SBIR.gov. But through that, you'll see a variety of information. So again, I would point people to, if you're looking at understanding your rights, so there's the policy directive. That is the main, essentially, regulatory document for our program. That is the guidebook. That is the Bible for what your rights are. Understand those, and then go out and find your opportunities. And there are also plenty of, because again, it's a big government. Sometimes there are solutions that you have developed that are great fits. We don't know about them. So talk to the technical point of contacts, talk to those program managers, talk to those individuals, figure out if there's a fit, let them know you have an ability to give them a solution. Start those conversations, start early building those relationships with primes, with industry, with venture capital if that's the direction you want to go. But always know you have resources available to you. You don't need to go at it alone. So with that, open it up for questions from the group. Yes? Sure.
On that, where it says, I'm going to have a phase one,
Mm-hmm.
which you will no more than $6,500 per year. So if I have a firm that has its 5 phase ones,
Yeah.
is that, they're only limited to that one 6,500. They can't do 6,500 on all 5 awards.
$6,500 per year.
Where it's different on phase 2 because it says per project.
Mm-hmm. So one of the requirements I didn't put on this page, so SBA has been tasked with creating a maximum amount of the phase 2 TABA you can receive. So that is something we'll be going out for a public comment on in the next couple of months or so. It may go a little bit, but definitely over the next year or so we'll have that out for public comment. Other question? Yes, on the left, my left.
Is there an approved list of vendors for these support services available?
So that's a good question. So at the moment, there is not such a list. So there have been discussions about whether that makes sense. That's something companies would like, if companies even feel comfortable finding the types of services that they would want. So at the moment, some of your best sources, so there are agencies that have existing contracts, provide services. And at the moment, I don't think most companies or most organizations have it set up to do at the 50K level. So there's still a lot of internal conversations on what is most appropriate there. But I would turn to some of your local groups. If you go to SBIR.gov under the local resources section, I would connect in with groups like the Colorado SBDC if you're local, because they will have a better pulse on different services that are available locally and different groups that can help you at different phases with different needs. Other questions? Okay, and if I can, so I want to steal something. So we had Jim Sweeney here earlier, but I'm going to go and take a quote from his boss. And I think it may be in the slides, I haven't seen them. But the Air Force has a slide that talks about inventors make stuff, innovators make history. So again, this is kind of the core of what our program is, that their idea is we can create something that is great, that is technically savvy, that is state-of-the-art, but we're looking for people that can put that together, that can take that invention, innovate it, find solutions, and then find the markets for those. Anna?
Thank you, Chris. Can we give a round of applause for all of our panelists today? I just want to make one last comment that for NASA, we often collaborate with some of the other agencies like DARPA in releasing our phase 2s. So oftentimes other agencies are really interested in our phase 1s or phase 2s, and so we're working with them to go ahead and make those awards from the other agencies. So Chris is right, making sure that you're in contact with your technical monitors, your cores, so that you're looking across the agencies for needs rather than just one. Okay, I'll hand it back over to Art. Thank you, everybody.
So thank you to our panel, and thank you for pulling us through the post-cheesecake valley of death there. I know it's late in the day here, but thank you all. We're going to take a break, and at 3:15, we're going to convene back in here for our final session. One of the things we're trying to do is kind of open the aperture for folks to think beyond maybe the agencies they normally deal with, and in our final session, we're going to really try and open it even broader to think about other programs, other type of ways to engage with the agencies. So please come back at 3:15, and thank you again.